On April 7, 1945, the morning in Allengrabo, a small German town about 70 kilometers west of Berlin, was cold and covered in mist. Hedwig Miller, a 23-year-old auxiliary who had already spent 3 years in service, stood at the window of the old schoolhouse where she and others had been housed for months. What she saw outside went against everything she had been taught for years about the Americans. Instead of violent and lawless men described in Nazi propaganda, she saw organized columns of soldiers. They were well-fed, properly equipped, and moved with calm confidence. Their vehicles were clean and in good condition, arriving in long lines she had never witnessed before. The shock came not only from their appearance but also from their actions. American troops were unloading trucks filled with food, medicine, and blankets. Rather than behaving like dangerous invaders, they were giving supplies to the very people they had defeated. Hedwig later wrote in her diary that they looked like giants, confident men who had never known true hunger. She was stunned when she saw an African-American soldier handing chocolate to German children. At that moment, she realized the Reich that had promised endless glory had not even been able to provide its own women with basic necessities like soap. Yet here were the supposed enemies, sharing goods more freely than she had seen in months. American military police soon set up a protective perimeter around the women's quarters to ensure their safety. Hedwig and many others suddenly understood how much they had been deceived. The image of German superiority collapsed in front of them. There were cartons of cigarettes, coffee, fresh bread, and smiling soldiers with white teeth, details that highlighted the sharp difference between Nazi propaganda and the reality before them. Nearly 19,000 female auxiliaries went through this kind of experience in the final months of the war. Allied troops often misidentified them as comfort women, but in truth, they served in clerical and communication roles. Unlike male prisoners captured on the battlefield, these women had more time to absorb the shock of defeat and confront how much their worldview had been based on falsehoods. Their disillusionment was rooted in years of propaganda. Since 1933, Nazi media painted Americans as weak, immoral, and obsessed with money. Films and publications portrayed them as incapable of serious warfare and described their wealth as a sign of corruption rather than strength. Hedwig, like many others, grew up entirely within this environment. She went to school as Hitler rose to power and saw Germany achieve early successes that seemed to prove the propaganda true. By 1941, over 100,000 German women were serving in auxiliary roles such as communications, administration, and medical support. Unlike the Soviet Union, Germany did not use women as combatants but kept them in supporting roles. They received a few weeks of training, modest pay, and uniforms designed to look both practical and feminine, reflecting the regime's mixed views on women's roles. When the United States entered the war, propaganda shifted. Americans were mocked as materialistic but weak. Newspapers claimed their soldiers were little more than cowboys and criminals in uniform. Films warned Germans of brutal treatment if the Allies ever reached their land. By 1945, as American forces closed in, pamphlets spread fear by claiming that German women would face violence and mass killings. The reality was very different. Reports from American officers described terrified women expecting the worst, only to break down in tears of relief when they were told they would be treated under the Geneva Convention. Some cried simply at being given a standard ration pack, unable to believe such food could be so casually provided. Throughout 1945, American forces encountered thousands of female auxiliaries who had been left behind as the German army retreated. These women were placed in separate detention facilities, often with female military police assigned when possible. Accounts from the women themselves reveal how shocking the differences were. They were housed in clean buildings, given real beds, and fed the same rations as American soldiers. For those who had lived on hunger rations and poor quality bread, the abundance of chocolate, coffee, and cigarettes was unimaginable. The contrast in industrial capacity was undeniable. America produced far more vehicles, aircraft, and supplies than Germany could ever manage. To the women, this was visible in the endless convoys of trucks, the abundance of equipment, and the casual discarding of items Germans would have treasured. Personal hygiene stood out as well. German civilians had been conserving water, while American soldiers shaved daily, carried their own toothbrushes, razors, and soap. Women who saw this realized that the propaganda about American poverty had been false. Many also noticed the physical size of the soldiers, who were taller and healthier thanks to better nutrition. Most striking was the presence of African American soldiers. Nazi teachings had described them as inferior, but in reality, they were disciplined, capable, and respectful. For many auxiliaries, this direct contradiction to everything they had been taught was the moment their beliefs began to collapse. By summer 1945, the women were placed in larger internment camps. Conditions were far better than expected: organized routines, access to books, film screenings, and proper medical treatment. Doctors documented widespread malnutrition, dental issues, and psychological stress, but these were quickly addressed with care and supplies. Within weeks, many women showed visible improvements in health. Regular deliveries of food and medicine highlighted America's logistical strength, undermining years of claims that Americans were disorganized or weak. For the women who had lived through years of indoctrination and deprivation, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Even the way Americans handled waste surprised the women. Trash was sorted, collected in specific places, and taken away daily by dedicated trucks. This level of organization was something Germany had not achieved, even during its strongest years. As the months went on, U.S. authorities began running re-education programs for German prisoners, including the auxiliaries. These efforts aimed to break Nazi influence and help prepare people for civilian life again. Films became one of the main tools. Prisoners were shown documentaries of American factories, farms, universities, and everyday life, alongside footage of Nazi crimes. For some women, this was overwhelming. Bridget Hoffman, who had served in France, later admitted that seeing the truth changed everything for her. One American factory in Detroit built more vehicles in a single month than Germany did in the entire final year of the war, she recalled. Then they showed us Buchenwald. I couldn't sleep for days. Everything we had been told was a lie. For others, change came more slowly. Small, daily observations began to erode what they had once believed. They noticed how American soldiers of different races worked side by side, how officers and regular troops interacted with less distance, and how female American personnel carried out their duties with confidence. Each detail contradicted years of propaganda. Letters home, though censored, also revealed this gradual shift. At first, many women still described Americans in ways shaped by old teachings. But with time, those letters began to include admiration and doubt. Hella Pfizer wrote to her mother in Munich in August 1945, noting her surprise that American bands played Beethoven and Mozart, not just jazz as expected. The conductor, a Jewish officer, even praised German music, a moment that forced her to question what she had been taught. By autumn, many auxiliaries considered low risk were released and sent back to their ruined towns. They returned healthier, with more weight, better medical care, and even small gifts from American guards. But these changes often created tension at home. Families who had only experienced hardship and bombing could not accept stories of generosity from the enemy. Erica Brown recalled that her father refused to believe her descriptions of American supplies, insisting the items must have come from captured German stockpiles. Some women faced suspicion from neighbors. Speaking positively about captivity sometimes led to accusations of collaboration. Louise Hoffman, released near Stuttgart, remembered people whispering about her because she no longer shared their bitterness. She explained that her views had changed not from disloyalty, but because she had seen with her own eyes how false much of Nazi teaching had been. American authorities studied these shifts closely. Reports showed that simple, material experiences, hot water, steady food supplies, new clothes, were far more effective at breaking old beliefs than lectures or debates. A psychologist, Dr. Margaret Hoffman, interviewed more than 300 auxiliaries in 1946 and confirmed that everyday comforts influenced them more than arguments ever could. This reflected a larger truth about post-war Germany. As the U.S. shifted from punishment to rebuilding through the Marshall Plan, the material recovery helped Germans accept new political systems. Abundance became a teacher in itself. Hedwig Muller, whose story began with her shock at seeing American soldiers in Alan Grabo, was among those most deeply changed. After months in custody, she returned home with new views. A few years later, she worked for the American consulate in Munich, and in 1952 she married an American veteran. By 1955, she had moved with him to Ohio, joining thousands of other auxiliaries who built new lives through marriage and migration. In later years, Hedwig reflected on the turning point. We had been told the Americans would destroy us. Instead, they gave us food and protection. My first chocolate bar said more about America than all of Goebbels's speeches. She concluded that abundance creates generosity, while scarcity breeds fear, a lesson she carried into her new life. The experiences of these women highlight a unique side of defeat and rebuilding. Unlike male soldiers captured in battle, they faced a long, personal confrontation with reality. Their testimonies show how material evidence, chocolate, soap, running water, dismantled propaganda more effectively than any argument. This mirrored the wider transformation of German society, where post-war prosperity helped democracy take root. Ironically, the Nazi regime had glorified sacrifice and hardship, claiming this proved spiritual strength. Yet it was America's abundance that proved more persuasive. What German leaders called weakness turned out to be the foundation of strength. By the 1950s, the same lesson echoed across Germany as the economy recovered. The so-called economic miracle reinforced what many auxiliaries had already discovered in captivity: prosperity builds stability better than fear ever could. For Hedwig and thousands of others, defeat became the doorway to a completely new understanding of the world. Their lives show how quickly even the most deeply held beliefs can crumble when faced with undeniable evidence, and how human beings, given dignity and opportunity, can rebuild not only their lives but their values. The story of the German auxiliaries, the Helferinnen, shows more than the collapse of a military regime. It shows how ordinary people faced a reality that broke through years of lies. For these young women, defeat was not only about losing a war. It was about losing an entire worldview, a belief system built carefully through schools, films, newspapers, and speeches. They had been told the Americans were weak, divided, and cruel. Yet when they finally met them, they saw soldiers who were healthy, disciplined, and generous. The smallest details, chocolate handed to children, soap for washing, music played in camp halls, were stronger than any speech. Hedwig Muller's journey captures this transformation. From her first glimpse of endless American trucks in Alan Graybo, she began to doubt what she had been taught. Over months of captivity, each new discovery, better food, medical care, clean beds, libraries, and fair treatment, made the propaganda harder to believe. She was not alone. Thousands of other women went through the same process, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a sudden moment of shock. For some, it was seeing an African-American soldier act with respect. For others, it was watching American officers show admiration for German music and culture. These moments created tension when the women returned home. Families and neighbors, hardened by bombings and shortages, could not believe such stories of abundance. Many accused the women of exaggerating or even collaborating. But their testimonies remind us that change often begins with those who see a different world firsthand. The wider history of post-war Germany proves the same lesson. Recovery did not come only from new laws or speeches about democracy. It came from full stomachs, steady work, warm homes, and the return of dignity. Prosperity built trust, and trust made space for new political ideas. The Helferinnen were among the first Germans to experience this shift. Their lives showed that propaganda can hold power for years, but when people touch, taste, and live a different reality, false beliefs cannot last. Hedwig's later life in America was not just a personal story, it symbolized how enemies could become citizens, neighbors, and family. Her memory of a single chocolate bar, given without demand for thanks, stayed with her forever. It carried a lesson still relevant today, that abundance and fairness can break down walls where fear and violence cannot. Their voices remind us that even in the ruins of war, new beginnings are possible, built not on myths, but on lived truth.